Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. The brick door. It started with a simple renovation. I had inherited my grandfather's old house, a relic from the 19th century nestled on the outskirts of town. The place had its charms, creaking wooden floors, weathered brick walls, and the scent of aged timber that clung to every corner. But there were also dark corners, places that seemed to swallow the light. The cellar was one such place. It had always unnerved me, but I figured it was just because of its musty, forgotten nature. Until I found the door. The door was hidden behind a stack of old, rotting crates. I hadn't even known it was there until I started clearing the cellar for the first time in years. It looked ancient, older than the house itself, with rusted iron hinges and thick wooden planks that seemed ready to crumble. Stranger still, it had been bricked up. Rough, uneven bricks sealed the door shut. I stood there, staring at it, feeling a chill creep down my spine. The room had grown unnaturally cold, but I brushed it off as the typical dampness of an underground space. Later that night, as I sat in the living room, I began hearing a sound. It was soft at first, barely audible, but it grew more insistent as the minutes passed. A rhythmic thump, thump. I paused the movie I was half watching, my heart skipping a beat. It was coming from the cellar. The bricked-up door. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, but as the hours dragged on, the knocking grew louder. Every knock echoed through the floorboards, a steady beat that resonated with an unnatural rhythm. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down to the cellar, my heart hammering in my chest. The air was thick with a strange, suffocating tension as I descended the creaky stairs. The door stood there, unmoved, but the knocking hadn't stopped. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam shaking as it illuminated the rough bricks. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the slow, deliberate knock. Thump, thump. I touched the door, and the coldness of the wood seeped into my skin like ice. For a moment, I thought I heard something else, a whisper, faint and distant, on the other side. That night, I couldn't sleep. The knocking persisted, growing louder, more insistent. Every beat of that eerie sound felt like it was reaching deeper into my soul, and I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. I even considered calling someone, anyone, but what would I say? That there was something behind a bricked-up door in my cellar, knocking to get out? By morning, the knocking stopped. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, some strange acoustical anomaly, though deep down, I knew better. Something was waiting behind that door. Something that should have remained hidden. But curiosity gnawed at me. What was behind those bricks? And why had my grandfather never mentioned it? Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Days passed, but the knocking never truly left my mind. It was as if the sound had buried itself deep in my thoughts, a constant reminder that something was down there. I told myself to leave it alone, but each night, when the house grew quiet, I would hear it again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Thump, thump. It beckoned me, taunted me, daring me to open the door. On the fourth night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the door. The bricks, the ancient wood, the cold, unyielding iron hinges. Something behind it, moving, shifting. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. The next morning, I went to the local hardware store and bought everything I needed, chisels, hammers, and a crowbar. The old man behind the counter raised an eyebrow at the collection. "Renovating, huh?" he asked, his voice dry and gravelly. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just some old stuff in the cellar. Found something strange down there." He leaned in, his expression darkening. "Strange? In an old house like yours, that's never a good sign. They say those places have a way of keeping secrets." I laughed it off, but his words gnawed at me. Back home, I stood in front of the bricked-up door, tools in hand, my resolve wavering. This was madness. But that knock, it had invaded my every waking moment, driving me to the edge. I placed the chisel between two bricks and struck with the hammer. The sound echoed through the cellar, a harsh, jarring noise. I paused, listening. Silence. I continued. Brick by brick, I tore down the wall. Sweat dripped down my face, and my hands shook as the pile of debris grew at my feet. Hours passed, and finally, the last brick fell. I stood back, panting, staring at the door. It was whole again, free from its prison of bricks. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle, the cold iron biting into my skin. The air in the cellar had turned heavy, almost oppressive, like the weight of the earth was pressing down on me. I hesitated, but the knocking had stopped the moment the last brick fell. The silence was worse. It was as though the house held its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. Slowly, I twisted the handle. The door creaked open with a long, mournful groan, revealing only blackness beyond. The air that wafted from the space was rancid, thick with the stench of decay and something else, something ancient and foul. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught only dirt walls and the remains of old wooden beams, as though there had once been a tunnel, long forgotten. But there was something else, too. Deep gouges in the dirt, as if something had clawed at the walls, desperate to get out. My breath caught in my throat as I spotted what looked like old, brittle bones scattered on the floor, human bones. And then, from the blackness beyond the beam of light, I heard a voice. Low, rasping, barely more than a whisper, but unmistakable. It called my name. Come closer. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the debris from the torn-down wall. My flashlight flickered, casting strange, jittering shadows across the dirt floor. The voice, the way it had said my name, chilled me to the core. It wasn't just a whisper, it felt like the breath of the earth itself, a force older and darker than anything I'd ever known. I stood there, frozen, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Could someone have been trapped down here? But no, the door had been bricked up for longer than I had been alive, longer than my grandfather's time, perhaps even before the house was built. I took a step back, intending to run upstairs, slam the cellar door, and never return. But then the voice called again, softer, more pleading this time. Please, help me. The words slithered through the stale air, wrapping around my thoughts. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave, I found myself stepping forward again, closer to the gaping black maw of the tunnel. I don't understand, I stammered, gripping the flashlight tightly. Who are you? How do you know my name? There was a moment of silence, thick and suffocating. Then, the voice responded, clearer now, as though it had been waiting for the question. I've been waiting for you. I am bound to this place, to the bloodline. The word bloodline sent a shock through me, like a jolt of cold electricity. My grandfather had never spoken of anything unusual about the house, but there had always been something strange in the way he avoided the cellar. And now, here I was, standing in front of something he had tried to keep hidden. A gust of frigid air rushed from the tunnel, extinguishing my flashlight. Panic clawed at my chest as I fumbled to turn it back on, but the darkness felt alive, pressing in on all sides. In that pitch-black void, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from deep within the tunnel. Stay away! I shouted, my voice echoing back at me. But whatever was coming didn't stop. I could hear the scraping of nails against the dirt walls, the unsettling click of bones shifting. And then, in the near-total darkness, I felt a presence. Something loomed just beyond the edge of my senses, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating from it. The flashlight flickered back to life, casting a weak, shivering beam. My heart nearly stopped when the light caught a glimpse of someone, standing just at the mouth of the tunnel. It was a figure, pale and gaunt, their skin stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes were hollow, deep shadows where human eyes should have been. But what terrified me most was the grin, wide and unnatural, splitting their face in a grotesque display of teeth. It spoke again, But this time, its voice was different, low and guttural, as though several voices were speaking at once. "You are the key. The door was never meant to hold me, but to hold you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Me? I took a shaky step back, my mind racing, trying to process what I had just heard. Was it lying? Manipulating me? The figure took a step closer, and the air seemed to hum with a dreadful energy. I could feel something shifting beneath my feet, like the very earth was trembling in anticipation of something terrible. Before I could move, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking me in the cellar. I spun around, running to the door, banging on it with all my strength. But the voice from the tunnel was closer now, almost breathing down my neck. "There is no escape," it whispered. "You are home." I hammered against the door, the cold metal bruising my hands, but it didn't budge. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped in the cellar with it. The figure in the tunnel was closer now, its twisted grin visible in the faint light. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the dirt floor, creeping toward me like some hungry thing. Desperation clawed at my mind. I had to get out. I had to think. My heart raced, my breath coming in shallow gasps. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice cracking as I faced the figure. It stepped forward, closer, the sickly light from my flickering flashlight catching the dull gleam of its sharp teeth. "You!" It rasped, its voice curling through the cellar like a hiss of smoke. "You are the heir. You are the one who will open the way." The words sent a cold shock through me. The figure moved inhumanly fast, suddenly appearing just feet away. The smell of rot and decay clung to it, the stench making my stomach turn. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the cellar door, my hands shaking. "Open the way?" "What way?" I demanded, even though I could already feel the answer in the pit of my stomach. It grinned wider, an impossible stretch of skin over bone. "Your grandfather knew. He sealed me here, thinking he could keep the door shut forever. But blood calls to blood, and now you've come to finish what he started." The air in the cellar grew thick with dread, every breath heavy, as if the room itself were suffocating me. I turned, feeling along the walls, searching for any other exit, but the door was the only way out. The figure's voice was softer now, almost a whisper. "There is only one way to be free. Only one way to silence the knocking, forever." I turned back to face it, dread pooling in my chest. "What way?" I asked, my voice barely audible. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing toward the tunnel, where the darkness writhed like a living thing. "You must enter. Only then will you understand." The figure stepped back into the shadows, disappearing into the blackness of the tunnel, leaving me alone with its words echoing in my mind. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the earth itself. I stood at the mouth of the tunnel, the flashlight's weak beam trembling in my hands. My instincts screamed to run, but I was trapped. There was no way out but forward. I took a step into the tunnel, the darkness closing around me like a shroud. The air was colder here, and the walls felt closer, as if they were pressing in on me. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. As I moved deeper, the tunnel began to twist and narrow. Strange symbols were carved into the dirt walls, ancient markings that pulsed with a faint, sickly glow. I felt them pulling me forward, their meaning lost to time but somehow understood by the deepest parts of my mind. This wasn't just a tunnel, it was a path. A path that had been waiting for me all along. I heard a whisper ahead, faint but clear. "Come closer." My legs moved of their own accord, carrying me toward the sound. I no longer knew if I was walking or being dragged. The ground sloped downward, the tunnel spiraling deeper into the earth, and the air grew thicker with every step. And then, in the flickering beam of my flashlight, I saw it, a door, not like the one in the cellar, but a massive, ancient thing carved from stone, covered in the same strange symbols. The knocking began again, louder this time, more violent. The door shuddered as something on the other side pounded against it, demanding release. The realization hit me with terrifying clarity. I wasn't meant to stop this. I was meant to open it. I was meant to let it out. Suddenly, the cellar door behind me swung open with a deafening crash, the light from the house flooding the dark space. My heart leapt, but when I turned back to the tunnel, the ancient stone door was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Behind me, the voice whispered once more. "Now you know." The knocking resumed, louder than ever. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Forest's Call. The road stretched out before me like a forgotten ribbon of asphalt, winding through an expanse of dense, shadowed forest. The early morning light had long since faded, swallowed by an unnaturally dark evening sky. The hum of the car engine was the only comfort as I glanced at the GPS. A calm voice spoke from the device, "Turn around when possible." I frowned. That was odd. There was no reason to turn around, was there? I had taken this route dozens of times before. This was the shortcut through the forest that saved me at least 20 minutes. But the GPS had never instructed me to turn back. I ignored it at first, chalking it up to a glitch. After all, technology wasn't infallible. But then the voice came again, more insistent this time. "Turn around. Turn around now." There was an edge to it, something that made my skin crawl. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, but I pushed forward, dismissing the unease prickling at the back of my neck. As I continued, I noticed something unsettling. The trees lining the road seemed closer than I remembered. Their gnarled branches arched overhead, intertwining like the fingers of an old witch ready to close her grip. The GPS chimed again. "Turn around." My heartbeat quickened, an irrational panic slowly building. The road had become narrower, more twisted. I was sure this wasn't the path I knew. But how could that be? I'd never taken a wrong turn. Glancing back at the screen, I saw the blue route line vanish entirely. The digital map was now nothing but an empty, gray grid. No landmarks, no road ahead, just nothing. I slammed the brakes, my heart pounding. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring into the woods as the night grew unnervingly still. The GPS was silent now, as if waiting. I checked my phone for signal, no bars, of course. Suddenly, the car's headlights flickered, casting long shadows that danced and twisted among the trees. In the dim light, something moved. I could have sworn I saw a figure, tall and hunched, skirting just outside the beam's reach. I squinted, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the shadows. But then I heard it. A distant, low moan carried on the wind, as if the forest itself was whispering my name. Before I could react, the GPS came to life again, the voice now distorted, almost amused. "Turn around, or stay." My blood ran cold. There was something wrong, terribly wrong. This was no glitch. This thing, whatever it was, wanted me here. I had been led deep into the forest, and now it was waiting. I hit the gas, adrenaline flooding my system. The car lurched forward, tires spinning against the damp gravel as I sped down the narrowing road. The forest on either side seemed to shift, like the trees were closing in, and every shadow became a watching figure. The GPS remained silent, but its twisted, mocking command echoed in my mind, "Turn around, or stay." I wasn't sure where I was anymore, but I knew one thing: I needed to get out of these woods. The deeper I drove, the more disoriented I became. My knuckles were white against the wheel as I tried to focus on the road ahead. But the road was wrong. It was bending unnaturally, twisting in ways I couldn't predict. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something chasing me, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating dark, swallowing everything behind me. Then came the voice, soft at first, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "You shouldn't have come here." I snapped my head to the side, heart racing, but there was no one. The voice had come from the forest, from the shadows between the trees. My chest tightened as I realized it hadn't been a random breeze. It was someone. Or something. "Turn around," the voice urged, clearer now. This wasn't the GPS anymore. No, this voice was different, human-like but hollow, like it came from something pretending to be human. I floored the accelerator again, but the car only seemed to struggle more. The trees now grew impossibly tall, their twisted branches forming a canopy so thick that even the moonlight couldn't penetrate it. I was driving blind through a forest that no longer felt real. My surroundings had become a living nightmare. Suddenly, the car jerked violently to the side. I slammed the brakes, the tires screeching as I skidded to a halt. My heart pounded as I realized I was no longer on the road. The path was gone. It had just disappeared. In its place was dense undergrowth, tangled roots, and the oppressive dark of the forest. I couldn't understand it. I had been on the road just moments ago, but now it was as if the forest had swallowed it whole. I scrambled to open the car door, stepping out into the thick, damp air. My breath came in short gasps as I looked around. The oppressive silence pressed in from all sides. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. But the only response was the rustling of leaves and the faint, far-off creak of the trees. Then I heard it again, that same voice. But this time, it was behind me. "You can't leave now." I spun around, and there, standing just at the edge of the light, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its form seemed to blend with the shadows, making it difficult to see clearly. My heart raced as I backed toward the car, fumbling for the door handle, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. The air around me grew cold, and a deep dread settled in my bones. "Stay," the voice whispered, more insistent, more intimate, as though it were speaking directly into my mind. My skin crawled. I slammed the car door shut and locked it, heart pounding in my throat. But the figure remained, unmoving, as if it knew something I didn't. I stared at the GPS, which had flickered back to life. The screen was covered in static, but through the distortion, I could see a single message displayed: "You are here." I couldn't breathe. The figure in the distance remained, standing just outside the reach of the headlights. My fingers shook as I gripped the steering wheel, but the car felt like a flimsy barrier between me and whatever was out there. The cold air inside the vehicle thickened, pressing against my chest, making it hard to think clearly. The GPS blinked again, its distorted message unwavering: "You are here." I wanted to scream. Where was here? What did it mean? Without warning, the figure moved. Not toward me, but sideways, slithering between the trees like a shadow itself, its presence a stain on the night. The voice in my head returned, louder this time, as though it was no longer content with whispers. "You've come too far. There's no turning back now." I slammed my hand on the dashboard, hoping for some sense of control, but I felt none. My fear was a living thing, tightening around my lungs, making it impossible to act. Suddenly, the radio crackled, static filling the car. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice trying to break through the interference. I leaned forward, straining to make out the words, but all I caught were fragments, like someone screaming from far away. "Help, don't, the woods." And then the static intensified, drowning everything out. I turned the radio off in frustration, my hand trembling as I wiped sweat from my brow. But I wasn't sweating from heat, I was drenched in cold fear. I needed to move. I couldn't stay here, not with that thing lurking in the dark. My foot hesitated over the pedal as I stared at the distorted GPS screen. Something was wrong with it, but it was the only thing giving me any direction. In a final act of desperation, I started the car again, praying that this time I would find my way back to the road, back to something familiar. The engine roared to life, but the woods around me felt unchanged, as though I hadn't moved at all. The car lurched forward through the thick underbrush, tires crunching over unseen obstacles. The headlights barely cut through the oppressive dark now, illuminating only the immediate space ahead of me. After what felt like an eternity, the road reappeared, but it was wrong, unnatural. It was the same road, but at the same time, it wasn't. It twisted in on itself, like a snake eating its own tail. I realized with a sickening certainty that I had been driving in circles, led deeper into the forest by something that wasn't meant to be understood. Then I saw it again, another figure. No, not just one. There were several now. Tall, thin shadows, standing along the road, unmoving. I swallowed hard, feeling bile rise in my throat. They weren't human. Not even close. Their limbs were too long, their movements too fluid, like something had draped human skin over an animal's frame, and they watched me with hollow, empty eyes. I could feel their gaze even though I couldn't see their faces. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting as it stared at me through the windshield. The car stalled, the engine choking as if it had sensed the presence of something wrong, something unnatural. The figure raised a bony hand and pointed down the road. My stomach clenched in terror as the GPS blinked back to life with one final command: turn around. I didn't. I couldn't. I floored the accelerator, desperate to escape, but I knew in my gut that I wasn't driving out of the forest. I was being pulled in deeper, to wherever these creatures wanted me to go. The road ahead stretched out impossibly, longer than it should have been. The figures disappeared into the dark, but I could still feel them, lurking just outside my vision. Then, from the trees, came that voice again, calm, steady, and full of malice. It's not the road that's trapping you. It's the forest. I had never felt so small. The road, the trees, the figures, they had all become part of a dark, living maze designed to swallow me whole. The car's engine sputtered weakly, barely clinging to life as I pressed harder on the accelerator. But I knew, deep down, I wasn't going anywhere. The forest was alive, breathing, pulling me deeper into its depths with every desperate attempt to escape. My hands were slick with sweat, my mind racing with thoughts of how this could possibly end. The voice returned, colder, more insistent. You're almost there. My stomach churned. Almost where? The road had stretched on for what felt like hours, spiraling into the same suffocating darkness. The trees, now massive and towering like ancient sentinels, seemed to loom closer with each passing second. I was trapped, but by what? The forest, the road, or something far worse? Suddenly, the car's engine died, sputtering out in a final groan. The headlights flickered off, leaving me in complete darkness. My breathing quickened, the weight of the silence pressing down on me. No, no, no! I shouted, hitting the dashboard in a futile attempt to restart the car. But it was dead, completely unresponsive. I was alone. Alone, except for the thing watching me from the trees. I didn't want to leave the car. It felt like the last piece of safety I had, but I couldn't stay here forever. My hands trembled as I opened the door, the cold night air biting at my skin. The forest felt wrong, too still, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped out, every instinct screaming at me to run, but where would I go? The moment I stepped onto the ground, the forest seemed to wake. A low, guttural groan echoed through the trees, and I could feel eyes, many eyes, watching me. My skin prickled as I turned in every direction, but the figures from before were nowhere to be seen. I was alone in this living nightmare, yet I could feel them all around me, waiting for something. And then I saw it, a faint light in the distance, flickering through the trees. It was far off, but it was there, like a lantern in the dark. Without thinking, I ran toward it, my feet pounding against the ground as branches tore at my clothes and skin. The forest seemed to close in tighter, the trees twisting and warping, making it harder to move. But that light, something about it was magnetic, pulling me toward it despite the terror that gripped my chest. As I neared the light, I realized it was coming from an old, decrepit house, nestled deep in the woods where no house should be. The windows were broken, and the walls sagged with age, but the glow from within was warm, inviting, like a beacon in the overwhelming darkness. For a brief moment, I considered turning back, but there was no back anymore. There was only forward. I approached the door, my heart racing as I raised a trembling hand to knock. Before I could, the door creaked open on its own. Inside, the light flickered from a single candle on a table in the center of the room. The house was empty, abandoned, yet somehow waiting. I stepped inside, my breath catching in my throat as I felt the air change, thick and heavy, like I had crossed into another world. The candle's flame flickered wildly, casting long, strange shadows on the walls. I stepped closer, drawn to the light, but as I did, the door behind me slammed shut. The house groaned as if waking from a deep sleep. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. And then, from the shadows, that voice came again, clearer than ever, its tone dripping with malice. "You never turned around." Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching, twisting into monstrous shapes. The figures from the woods appeared at the edge of the candlelight, their hollow eyes staring through me. My chest tightened as I backed into the corner, trapped. The last thing I saw was the candle flickering out, plunging the room, and my world, into complete darkness. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.